Hello and welcome back to this damn full idealistic crusade. In this video, I'm going to go over highlights and what I think are some really important titles and screenings at this year's TCM Classic Film Festival, which is the 15th and of course held in Los Angeles every year around this time, somewhere in April. Now, this is at a variety of locations, and what I do looking at the TCM festival list is the same that I do at any film festival where there are repertory screenings. And so what I do is I look for, of course, rare films. That way you know that there are elements that can be screened, and thus your art house may possibly be able to get them at some point in the future, meaning that there's a print floating around. Or, of course, this is where new restorations get premiered. Particularly Warner Brothers likes to premiere a lot of their new restorations and has two of their major catalog 4K masters that have been rumored and teased for some time that are premiering here, both for, of course, North by Northwest and The Searchers, which is why I have them behind me. But interestingly, they're doing them in different formats. They're not both just digital. North by Northwest is digital, and for The Searchers, they've made a new film element. But also, the TCM Festival in particular likes to occasionally do some 70mm and other large format screenings. In addition to this year and a few times in the past, they are also doing some Nitrate screenings because they're partnered with the American Cinematheque out there. So that is, of course, a rare opportunity to say the least, not only to see a 70mm print in 2024, but a Nitrate print in 2024 is an incredibly rare experience that you're only going to get in a handful of locations in the world. This, of course, is in addition to all of the programs and the special guests and the Q&As and interviews and other programs that I think this year it seems like they have an even better slate than they did last year of the supplemental programs and other short subjects packages and, of course, various meetups and gatherings and things. But what I like to do in these videos is basically give you the sort of rundown of how my brain works when I look at a festival list, because I go through looking, of course, for new masters and restorations, meaning that a new physical media release is somewhere on the horizon, particularly for Warner titles. That usually means a Warner Archive Blu-ray somewhere, or if there's already been a Blu-ray, sometimes they'll be showing the new DCP made from the new scan and master made for that Warner Archive Blu-ray. But of course, other studios have premiered things here as well, and it's always helpful to look at festivals to not only see new masters that are floating around and new restorations, but also you see new documentaries turn up that have not had a physical release yet or any American screenings yet, and there's a couple of those this year. But most of all, I like to see what prints are turning up, because that's my biggest draw to any theater in this day and age, because not only am I a film geek and a theater geek, but I try to see any film print I possibly can, because again, it's such a rare thing to have the ability to do, and you never know when you'll get the chance to see a particular print again. And for something like the TCM Film Festival, with the cachet that's involved and that they're in Los Angeles, they're going to get a lot of prints that studios are not often going to loan out. So you quite frequently see scattered in the 35mm listings some really rare titles, especially titles from the 30s and the pre-code era that you just aren't going to see pop up anywhere else unless you are very lucky to either live next to one of the major art houses of the world, or an art house that has a good connection with a particular studio that is willing to actually loan prints out, which more and more are not willing to do. Now, I wrote out a list, as I did last year, as there was so much to cover. I had to just write it all out on a sheet of paper so I wouldn't forget anything. And again, these are merely my own personal opinions, but if you happen to be going to this year's festival, or if you have a really good art house in your area, it might be possible for them to be able to get either some of these new restorations, new documentaries, or hopefully they'll be able to perhaps get some of these 35mm prints, mostly from Warner, but other studios as well, because they're actually loaning them out for screening. So that means they're in circulation, which is what you always have to look for if you're trying to figure out what prints are around that are in showable and rentable condition. But I did want to start with, I guess, the sort of questionable section. And these are all titles that are going to be screened from DCPs, so digital masters. But as these films don't have new scans or new restorations, it's presumably going to be using what's existing. And these are, of course, also available on physical media releases. And some of these masters do have problems baked in. So this would be the section that I would probably say you could probably choose something that's a bit rarer or go to a print screening instead, because the ones I'm going to list here, I would say, are a bit questionable, especially if they are indeed using the exact same masters that have turned up on the latest physical media releases. Some still had great picture restorations, but basically anything where I had a quibble, I put here. So to start with, there's going to be a screening of Disney's 101 Dalmatians, which of course went through the same process as all the other Disney animated titles, where they got torn apart and degrained and reanimated and remixed in their audio and just basically manipulated to within an inch of their life. And different Disney titles had different degrees of this, but so far we've only seen the new masters of Snow White and Cinderella actually be done with an archival mindset, and showed so that Disney is maybe finally starting to reverse their decades of revisionism. But that means any other Disney film, that any of the classic animated titles, it's going to show up in a DCP, and it's going to be the whatever version they last made, with all the changes and manipulation to the original animation and sound design. So unfortunately, I can't stand those. So anytime one of the Disney classics appears in this form, I'm just kind of like, I don't want to know. So if it was the new 4K master of Snow White or Cinderella, it would be fantastic, except that they don't have original audio, because we can't have a restoration from Disney that doesn't have a problem somewhere. But unfortunately, I would say definitely skip this one, especially if you're an animation purist. Then there's going to be a screening of The Silence of the Lambs, which I presume is MGM's 4K master that Kino Lorber put out on UHD. And the more recent MGM 4K masters of films have been having various issues in their transfers and overall presentation. Silence of the Lambs is very notable because it has a color space error for basically the opening reel, so the first 20 minutes or so is in the wrong color space, and it doesn't have the original audio, which is, and the remix that it has is, I think, far inferior to the original audio mix. So I would presume that it's this same 4K master. So if it is, that would be unfortunate, but unfortunately this stuff happens and then it gets baked in. It's also possible that color space issue was just a problem on Kino's UHD release, but given the fact that other MGM 4K masters have come out and Kino have released them, and those masters have problems baked in to the newer scans and masters that MGM has been doing, it's quite possible it's baked into the master itself, which is what I'm wondering. But in any case, it probably won't have the original audio either, which is a shame, because that film has a great mix for the era, and that should be the version that's always theatrically screened. There's going to be a DCP screening of Dirty Harry, which of course is held by Warner Brothers. Dirty Harry and the whole series has not had new scans in a long time, so I can only assume this would be the old Blu-ray master as a DCP, which has issues of its own. And Dirty Harry, rather infamously for myself and at least a good chunk of the home video and cinephile community, has not had its original mono mix in any form on any release, really since the dawn of home video. Bullet shares a similar fate, and for whatever reason, Warner has felt the need to stereoize or remix the film's audio for decades. Some fare better than others, but then eventually Dirty Harry got a brand new, completely different 5.1 multi-channel remix with brand new sound effects that does destroy the original sonic intent, and it's quite possible that that mix will be used on this DCP. So again, if it was a new 4K master and scan and a new restoration with the original mono mix, then absolutely go. But since there's not been any work done for these films in quite some time, and you've got the audio problem, I would definitely say this is one you can skip when you're trying to figure out your scheduling. Now, this next one is a DCP of Sony's restoration of On the Waterfront, which was completed a number of years ago. Beautifully done in picture, and of course you can pick it up on the Criterion Blu-ray release with a different choice of aspect ratios. However, it has the issue that is quite frequent in catalog restorations of, while it does have the original mono audio track, it has been scrubbed of detail a bit too much, and the best source at present is the old Columbia Laserdisc from the 90s with a PCM mono track. So if you go to this presentation, it's going to be basically a DCP of Sony's master, and of course it's going to have that inherent bit of audio scrubbing. The next is a DCP of Chinatown, and of course Chinatown is about to have a 4K UHD release by Paramount later this year, which has already been announced, so it's possible this could be the new 4K master, but it's not advertised as such, so I can only assume this is just a DCP of the older master that was also used for Blu-ray. And of course, the film's mono track has been scrubbed of detail on most of the past releases, and you have to go all the way back to the early 90s Laserdisc for a PCM mono that is superior to the current and all the various versions on DVD and Blu-ray. Of course, it remains to be seen what the 4K master turns out like, but I'm sure with it being Paramount, I don't really have any faith in them doing it correctly, and I'm quite sure the mono audio will probably either be the same track as the Blu-ray that's been scrubbed of detail, or perhaps have even more processing applied to it. Next is a DCP screening of Double Indemnity, which again doesn't credit if it's the new 4K master that Criterion worked on and put out on their UHD release from a Universal 4K scan, or if it's an older DCP based on Universal's previous attempts that turned up on their Blu-ray release. If it is the new 4K master, which I assume it must be, of course, then you're going to have the best visual presentation of the film, but that audio track on there has been scrubbed a little bit of detail and does not sound as good as the old Laserdisc that Universal did back when they were doing the Encore Laserdisc back in the late 80s, early 90s. So it'll still be a great screening, and it's great to see it in a packed theater, but do keep in mind, if it's the new 4K master, it will have the audio track that's been scrubbed a little bit of detail. And if it's the older master, then it's got a rather noise-reduced audio track, and of course, much inferior picture quality to the new 4K master. And then lastly, for this section, there's going to be a DCP screening of The Asphalt Jungle, which did have a 2K scan and restoration that was released on Criterion's Blu-ray, and of course, is the best we've ever had for picture, but unfortunately the audio is also a bit scrubbed, and if you want the best sounding and most detailed mono presentation, you have to go back to MGM UA's old Laserdisc from the early to mid 90s and its digital PCM track. So if you go to see this presentation of The Asphalt Jungle, it'll basically be a DCP screening of what you're used to seeing on the Criterion Blu-ray with the same slightly scrubbed audio track. Now, to switch gears, we'll talk about the special programs and some of the non-film screenings and various events at this year's festival that I think are notable. And of course, there's so many. This is merely just, I think, some of the highlights. I think this is one of the best supplemental features or additional events, if you will, sections or groupings of the TCM festival in terms of looking at all of the past years. I think this is one of the best, if not arguably the best overall they've had in terms of heavy hitters and Q&As and celebrations and digging into various vaults. So we do have some new documentaries as well. So to talk about all of these together, we have a new documentary about the Archers entitled Made in England, The Films of Powell and Pressburger, which is a feature-length documentary on the legendary archers themselves, Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger. And they've certainly needed this level of documentary treatment for some time, and this is a new 2024 documentary that apparently has not been screened anywhere in the US, and this will be its American premiere. We have a program entitled That's Vitaphone, The Return of Sound on Disc for 2024. And what this is actually a restoration project done by Warner Motion Picture Imaging of several classic Vitaphone short subjects and vaudeville pieces, pretty much, that have been restored, and they're being shown on film, but they've actually taken the trouble of recreating the Vitaphone turntable, and they're actually going to be playing the original Vitaphone disc itself on this custom-made turntable to play them back with the original film material that it's supposed to go with. So for the first time in almost 100 years, you actually can see a Vitaphone film, even if it's just a short subject, with the Vitaphone disc running. So this is a piece that belongs in a museum. This is one of the most major innovations in film in terms of the technical development of the film presentation experience, the early days of developing sound processes that were synced to film, but actually having that experience and the fact that they're actually playing the sound discs and they've synced them and built a new turntable just expressly for playing Vitaphone discs. it's probably a once in a lifetime experience for people today. And again, it's gonna be an absolute treasure of a memory to have that experience and then think back to that. And what's also great is that since they've made this new turntable, they've gone to the trouble of doing that. That would open the floodgates for Vitaphone restorations. If they have more Vitaphone sound discs, we could actually see Vitaphone materials, short subjects, and even features getting restored if they have the necessary sound disc, because now they've created a new turntable to actually do a proper capture to then get that material properly digitized, because they actually built a turntable that can actually replicate that perfectly. Of course, this year, Jodie Foster is being honored and is going to be doing the hand and foot ceremony in the cement outside at Grauman's Chinese Theater, which of course is why she's in some of the programming and why they're showing Silence of the Lambs. Then we have one of the wonderful special presentations with Craig Barron and Ben Burt, the wonderful technical wizards who do such beautiful explanations of classic films, and especially getting into the special effects, optical effects, and of course sound design. And they're going to be talking about the classic Them, which is a perfect film for them to tear into. So you'll be able to see, I guess, a DCP of them, and then hear them basically take you through a tour of the film's quite legendary usage of sound, and of course the effects work for the giant ants. Then we have the TCM Archive Project, which is basically digging into the history of the network and going through all of the various materials and the development of TCM, not just as a channel, but as a brand, and talking about the development of different programming and the different hosts and the different sort of network structures in terms of the corporate landscape, and basically giving you more of that inside look behind the scenes of how TCM has become the cultural mainstay that it is, and how it started in 1994 with very low aspirations and has managed to stay around all this time. So this will be a fascinating look into that, and sort of go hand in hand with some of the stuff that they're doing with some of the new promos and materials on both the channel and on the website, sort of celebrating their anniversary this year. Then we have a conversation with Billy D. Williams himself, who is appearing at the festival, having one of the lovely, lengthy stage conversations, as they usually do with various legends who they can get for each particular year. And then there will also be some screenings of Williams's films. So that'll be fascinating. So that way you can hear words of wisdom directly from the administrator of this facility himself. Then we have a program entitled 100 Years of MGM History, celebrating the UCLA Hearst Newsreel Collection. And this is really like the Vitaphone program, digging into materials that don't often get studied or talked about or recognized, which of course are newsreels. And of course these had to be researched and restored and digitized and able to be presented in this new program. So these will be, again, just like the Vitaphone program, this will be really important for people who are dedicated to film history and who are fascinated by the newsreels and short subjects that would precede features. But also, it's great to see that these materials that are so often overlooked and just kind of got thrown aside by the passage of time, that these materials are finally getting some attention and respect paid to them. So this should be a really fascinating program if you're looking for things just outside of the actual film screenings. Then we have another new documentary, which apparently is also premiering here, which is Frank Capra, Mr. America from 2023. This is a feature documentary about Frank Capra and his iconic cinematic legendary films, and of course his career trajectory as well. And it's great to see more focus on Capra, who honestly doesn't get talked about enough in great detail. But the danger with Capra materials in terms of biographies and things is having to avoid just repeating a lot of his self-mythologizing that he did in his autobiography. So I'm hoping this documentary does a good job of telling the story of his life and career, of course, but I hope it does actually dig deeper and go past a lot of the anecdotes and the stories and again the self-mythologizing, which he was very prone to doing. So for those who have not read Joseph McBride's Catastrophe of Success, which is his Frank Capra book, and that's really the book that first sort of made that much more in the public's eye, that there was a lot more to the Capra story. So I think Capra has needed a really well done feature-length documentary for some time, and I think it's great that we're finally seeing at least something in the realm of documentary now in regards to Capra's filmography. Then we have a conversation with Lois Burwell, who is a incredibly famous makeup artist in the industry whose career goes all the way back, I believe, at least to the early 80s, and she's worked on many high-profile, notable films. So it's great that the festival is again doing something where they talk to an actual industry professional who's not necessarily one of the people who's out front in front of the usual spotlight. I really like it when festivals go to legends within their craft, if you will, and actually focus on individual elements, whether it be makeup, costume design, production design, editing, sound design, and so on. Then we have a 2010 program or documentary or collection of films, really. I'm not sure. I guess that's how you would best describe it, which is Meili's 3D Discoveries. And these are films that were actually discovered in the Library of Congress, and they are other important and notable works of George Meili, of course, outside of his most famous work being A Trip to the Moon. Now, that's, of course, one of the most iconic and most famous films of all time. But, of course, he did do other things, and a great many of them did not survive or did not survive in very high quality. So this was really a treasure of discovery in the Library of Congress vaults, and how exactly those materials and negatives got there is a quite interesting story. But quite a few of these were actually in an early form of 3D, or at least an attempt to have a sort of stereoscopic effect. So this is basically in ways sort of a 3D presentation as well, which is why it's entitled 3D Discoveries. So this is a program that it's the type of program you're not exactly going to be able to experience at home anytime soon in terms of getting the full experience now that, especially since the 3D craze has gone and there aren't really 3D televisions being made anymore. Then we have a program entitled MGM at 100, a magical tour of Hollywood's greatest backlot. And this is another critical studies program where you are basically given a crash course in what the actual MGM backlot was like during the golden age of Hollywood and the golden age of MGM, the fanciest and the highest end of all the studios. So I believe this is going to use obviously a lot of various photographs and audiovisual materials and probably clips from newsreels and things to basically go through and give you that sort of feeling of being as close as you can to actually walking around the MGM backlot in, say, the 1920s or 30s. So this will be really fascinating for diehard Hollywood history fans. The most important for me personally is entitled Back from the Ink, Restored Animated Shorts. And what this is a group of newly restored short cartoons from the Fleischer Studios. And this is part of the overall sort of epic project that the Fleischer Group, or Fleischer Cartoons, you can follow them on Twitter, they're on various social media platforms, but they, along with the surviving heirs of the Fleischer family, have been trying to painstakingly restore every single original Fleischer cartoon. And now they've been able to partner with some of the various studios, especially Paramount, who has the real bulk, if not most, of all of the Fleischer holdings, and also partner with the Film Foundation and UCLA and other entities to help carry off these restorations and be as painstaking as possible, but actually have some official cachet to them and have more money behind them as well. So this is really fantastic to see. And if you were to go to any of the sort of special presentations of restored titles or materials that were not feature films, I think this is definitely one of the most important, because the Fleischers really were leading the charge for furthering the art of animation itself. They were Disney's greatest competition, and quite frankly, were far ahead of Disney in a great number of areas. So the entire Fleischer Library has been in dire need of this work for a great number of decades. Certain elements of the library fell into the public domain and have seen woeful preservation and presentation status. And the thing I'm most excited that the group is working on are, of course, the iconic masterpiece Fleischer Superman short cartoons that rather infamously were newly scanned by Warner Brothers, and basically those masters were destroyed by incompetence on that terrible Blu-ray that they put out, which is filled with errors and other problems, and is really just an unfortunate master and presentation all around. But the Fleischer Group has already been working on some of the shorts that they had various print materials of, and even in short clips and things they posted online, the difference is absolutely staggering. And of course, you have a team of people who are doing the work with all the effort and care in the world and making painstaking efforts to be as accurate as humanly possible, which the people at Warner unfortunately did not do. So I'm hoping that as part of this process, we can see all of the Fleischer Superman and the later famous Superman short cartoons get this same treatment. They've already done some of them, and now they've got this official backing. We can now see an entire DCP program of selected titles that have already been restored. So these are priceless treasures that are now looking and sounding the way they should always have been, and really undoing decades of poor preservation, poor treatment, and poor exhibition for the Fleischer catalog. And then lastly, for special presentations, this of course is a feature, but it's a silent film feature with a live score. The festival is running Buster Keaton's masterpiece, Sherlock Jr., in the latest restored DCP version, but it is going to have a live score performance by the always incredible Monte Alto Motion Picture Orchestra. So if you've never gotten to see a silent film with one of the great silent orchestras or great silent composers performing the score live, it's really an incredible experience. Even if you know the film backwards and forwards, it's never quite the same as seeing it in a packed theater with a live score. And again, you've got the Monte Alto Motion Picture Orchestra, so you've really got the best of the best for that, and that should be a fantastic screening. In this next category, these are all new digital restorations being presented as either DCPs or 4K DCPs. These are all premieres, and as far as I'm aware, these have not been shown anywhere else. So these are usually the big highlight every year, just to see what's the new restoration premiering, and knowing that there should be a physical media release somewhere on the horizon for the next year, somewhere. So we should be seeing all of these for Blu-ray and UHD by the end of the catalog year, probably. The first was a real surprise. It's The Small Backroom from 1949. I think this is one of the most underrated Powell and Pressburger films. It's not anything like their big, amazing Technicolor films, but it's, I think, one of the most effective World War II films, and it's about essentially the characters who don't go off and fight, the ones who reside in a particular stationary area, doing still very important work, but not getting the glory and not getting the recognition, and how all of this sort of preys on their mind over time. It's an incredibly well-made drama and beyond effective, and a title that's been there's a nice Criterion DVD, but that's been out of print for a while, and it's one of the Archers films that I've hoped would get a new scan and restoration at some point, and now it finally has. So hopefully that means there could be a Blu-ray on the horizon, because I don't know if this was done at 4K, but if it was, that could mean a UHD as well. Now, the next one is probably the one most people are aware of, and that's the new restoration of Seven, which was overseen by David Fincher, and this one is probably also one you could list under the questionable masters, because Fincher's given a number of interviews talking about how grading a film nowadays in the 4K realm and looking into the HDR landscape is an entirely different process, and Seven has seen a variety of different looks on different masters. Basically, every master looks different. There's no clear consensus on what's the best or most accurate version, and Fincher likes to change stuff a lot of times when he's doing a new master of one of his own films, as most directors unfortunately like to do when they're given that option. So there's no telling what this could be like in terms of color timing, the HDR presentation, the sound design. That's probably got a new sound remix, and it's also being shown in an IMAX theater. So I'm not exactly sure how that format is going to work with a film that was still a conventional 35 millimeter shoot in the mid 1990s. So it remains to be seen exactly what's been done with this new master, but this is where it's premiering, and the big draw is that it's being shown in an IMAX environment. The real heavy hitter, of course, is the 4K restoration of North by Northwest, which Warner Brothers has been working on for quite some time and should hopefully improve over the relatively solid previous high-res scan and Blu-ray release that was done a number of years ago. But I hope it does show marked improvements, as most of the new Warner scans have done for these new 4K catalog masters. And I really hope that they actually restore the film's original mono mix, which has been gone on video releases since the early to mid 90s. In fact, this basically every release before the DVD had the film's original audio, and every release from the DVD onwards has a 5.1 remix, which is quite revisionist and has music levels that are far too loud, and it's just nowhere near as well mixed as the original track. Of course, it being VistaVision, it's also possible that there could have been a Perspecta stereo or other alternate non-mono mix done, as was recently found and restored for The Man Who Knew Too Much. So there's a possibility in history now that there could be an additional or alternate audio mix that could be found and restored for this. But in any case, I do hope the original audio is finally present with the film, and it should improve over the solid but dated HD master that is on the Blu-ray release. So this is a title we've all been looking forward to for a long time. It's one of the crown jewels of the Warner library, and it's VistaVision, so that means, of course, it's large format as well, so the overall quality should be astounding. It's one of two major crown jewel VistaVision titles that Warner has restored this year, but interestingly, North by Northwest is just a 4K DCP, while The Searchers has actually been given a new film element, which we'll get to in a bit in a different category. So that's why I'm not talking about them at the same time. And then the last of these new digital restorations is another total surprise. It's 1932's Law and Order, which is one of the first attempts to show the story of Wyatt Earp and, of course, the gunfight at the OK Corral. I haven't seen this in a very long time, and it's a title I never thought would get restored. You've basically got Walter Houston playing the legendary Wyatt Earp himself, and some people have said this is probably the best or most accurate depiction of the actual gunfight at the OK Corral. So it's really fantastic that we're seeing this get restored. It's being screened as a DCP, and it was restored in collaboration with the Film Foundation, the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences, and Universal themselves, who have been doing some amazing new masters and 4K catalog work. Now we come to the stuff that gets me super excited, which are the film print screenings. And this year they really went for it in terms of 35 millimeter screenings. And it's a variety of big name titles, but also interesting gems and curios and titles that are extraordinarily rare to get any sort of theatrical screening, and some that are in real need of having a new master or scan in terms of what they have on home video releases are dated masters. So this is a real variety, and honestly, try to catch as many of these as you can, because a lot of these do not really pop up at other screenings, and some are of big titles that do have modern scans, and so it's going to be increasingly rare, if not impossible, to see prints of these, because studios are only going to want to send out the new DCP or 4K master. So to go through these, I've been going through all of these in the order of what days they're screening, so they're not in chronological order. So starting the first day, we have a 35 millimeter print screening of 1933's Only Yesterday, which is one of the John M. Stahl, essentially one of his weepies in terms of if you love that type of melodrama. Then we've got a print screening of Pulp Fiction, which again, talking about this being a wide variety of titles, you do a complete 180 and go into Tarantino land. Then we've got a print of White Heat, so they are going for heavy hitters as well. And this is another of the classics I would absolutely give a ridiculous amount of money for a ticket price to see a print of White Heat, so that should be stunning. Then they've got a print of Grand Hotel as well, and I think that's done to tie into this being the big MGM anniversary year. So we've got a lot of MGM titles, and of course Grand Hotel is one of the biggest and most iconic of MGM titles, and a film that does have a solid Blu-ray, but being able to see a film print will really be something. Then we have a print of 1935's The Good Fairy, which of course was written by Preston Sturges and directed by William Wyler, starring Margaret Sullivan, which does have a solid Kino Blu-ray, but I bet that print looks fantastic. Then we've got a print of Mighty Joe Young, which should be incredible to see Willis O'Brien's legendary effects work on the big screen, on a film print. I just don't know if it's going to have the orange-tinted fire sequences at the end. I assume it probably would, but it's possible it could be a later print that didn't have those. But that would make that experience even more fantastic if it's got the original orange tinting at the end. And there's a print of the, again, Wyler-directed Little Foxes with Bette Davis. Then a real rarity, they've got a print of the 1936 version of Three Godfathers, which some think is actually the best of the three film adaptations, even over the legendary John Ford version. So that is an absolute rarity, especially the fact that there's a surviving complete print that's in screenable condition. We've got a print of 1930's The Big House from MGM, one of the all-time great prison dramas. And then, amazingly, 1936's The Prisoner of Shark Island, which is a lesser discussed John Ford film, which I've always loved and find fascinating. So that'll be an incredible experience. Anytime you can see a print of a Ford picture, drop everything and go, because it's that much of an experience. And then that same thing applies to Rear Window, which has a print screening. But of course, Rear Window famously had to have an intensive restoration from Robert Harris and Jim Katz and Universal in 2000. And they did produce some absolutely gorgeous looking dye transfer Technicolor prints, which it took me most of my lifetime to be able to see that because I was too young in 2000, but I have seen one of those, and those are the only prints I'm aware of, so it doesn't credit it, but I can only assume this is actually one of those 2000 restoration prints that were all printed on dye transfer Ambition Technicolor and are absolute beauties, and none of the home releases on DVD, Blu-ray, or UHD match those as of yet. So this is definitely the best way to experience Rear Window, because that is really the best way to see it theatrically, and I don't think there's any other film version that's projectable. There was the Lost Hitchcock 1980s run of prints that were sort of cranked out, but in not very good quality, and probably would not be projectable today, unless Universal made a newer film print at some point in the interim. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but seeing as I was finally able to see one of those dye transfer Technicolor prints in about 2017 or so, they are out there, and Universal does very rarely loan them. And in fact, I was able to see that print, and other TCM festivals have played Rear Window in the past, and they've only had a DCP. So this is a real get for them, because it's very rare to see a Hitchcock print of any type in this day and age, because it's almost always going to be the latest DCP. So honestly, this is one of the most important of the film screenings, simply because it's an actual print of Rear Window, and it's very likely, I'm about 90% sure it's got to be one of those beautiful dye transfer prints from the 2000 restoration. Then we have the iconic Elvis himself and a print of Jailhouse Rock. Then we have a print of The Long Long Trailer from 1954, pairing Lucy and Desi, and directed by Vincent Minnelli. So this is a real treasure, because this is a film with a great fan following and a title that's been very popular on home video releases, but actually being able to see a print of it, especially in its 70th anniversary year, is going to be a real treat. Another of the most notable print screenings is a print being screened of the Anthony Mann directed El Cid, one of his historical epics that he had made for Samuel Bronston in Europe in the 1960s, and of course starring Charlton Heston and Sophia Loren. This is one of the titles of this sort of grouping that has been stuck in rights hell, and it has terrible video releases or video masters that are not up to snuff. This is a gorgeously made film. It is is a real visual feast for the eyes. It is a film that needs to be experienced on the biggest screen possible and has one of the greatest film scores possibly ever composed by Miklos Rozsa, an absolutely staggeringly powerful score. The atmosphere and impact of this film is such that at times it feels almost like a silent film because the dialogue almost feels like it's a supplement to the sheer force of the visuals and the music. So again, this is a film that has never had a proper home video release, never had a truly proper restoration. There was the attempt in the 90s with Scorsese and I guess the Film Foundation and also Miramax that had a limited theatrical run, but it had some issues of its own, but that's really the highest quality version I know to exist, and I'm assuming that's the print they're using for this screening. And that was the same print source that was used for Criterion's excellent Laserdisc and has a 5.1 rendering of the original multi-channel film mixed with the amazing score. So unfortunately, in a lot of ways, if you're here in the US and you want a good copy of LC, the old Criterion Laserdisc with the AC3 track is still just about your best option. So getting to see this theatrically, even if it's the 1990s attempt at a restoration on a print, is a must, and this is an incredibly rare film to see. I mean, it's hard to even get a video release because they're all out of print and they're not very good, or you have to import one of the out-of-print European Blu-rays, which are from masters of dubious quality and not very good. So it's definitely a film I've never seen listed for screenings anywhere, practically at all, let alone a film print. So this is one of the absolute drop everything and go see it screenings at the festival this year. And especially because this film is so incredibly powerful and such a visual and oral experience. It's one of those films that demands the biggest screen possible. It's one of the great historical epics on with a sense of pageantry and atmosphere that is pulverizing. So this is one of the ones where you just drop everything and go. Next, we have a print of the Mae West Preco classic, She Done Him Wrong from 1933, which of course also famously features a very young Cary Grant as the sort of boy toy of the film. Rather surprisingly, there's a print screening of this because Universal did complete their Mae West restorations, which Indicator released in their must-own box set on Blu-ray. But if the West films get shown, it's almost always going to be the restored DCP. So it's a real find or a real get for the festival to get a print from Universal now that there's already a new restoration master out there. So this is another one that it's if you're a fan of the film or you're curious about seeing a print of it, you should probably go, as you probably are not going to get the chance again anytime soon. Next is a print of 1940's Queen of the Mob, which is basically the first film to sort of tackle the infamous Ma Barker character and her sort of criminal family enterprise. And while this is more of a B film, it's incredibly rare to be seen theatrically or get a screening. So this is another one of the very deeper cut gems that the festival has put together for their film screenings. Next is one of my favorite screwball comedies of the 30s, 1938's The Mad Miss Manton, which pairs Barbara Stanwyck with Henry Fonda several years, basically 3 years before the famous The Lady Eve. This is a wonderful madcap screwball film that does not have a modern scan or physical media release. All there is the old Laserdisc master that I have on LD, and then the Warner Archive did an MOD DVD of that master. So it would be amazing to see a print of this, and I'm astonished that they have a good element that is projectable, because this is a very obscure film. Even among screwball fans, it doesn't get talked about as much as it should because it's so much ridiculous fun. Fonda famously did not have the greatest opinion of it, but he's wonderful in it, and he basically is the sort of a buffoon type character, or the guy whose life basically gets turned upside down. But the fun gag here is the film is of course led by Barbara Stanwyck, basically going around with her team of gal pals, going all around the city trying to solve murders while cracking wise. So what's not to love? This is an absolute must. Next is the famous Phil Carlson directed classic 50s noir, The Phoenix City Story from 1955. This is another film that rarely gets screened anymore. It's at least discussed in noir circles, but you don't see Phil Carlson noirs getting print screenings everywhere. This is another fantastic treasure that would be phenomenal on the big screen. Carlson's noirs are famous in noir circles for being smaller films that punch far above their weight and have such a visual sense and a crackling energy to them, and a very, in a lot of ways, a sort of documentary style of getting a lot of real location footage, and of course being black and white, but trying to give you more of the you are there sense. So this will be a fantastic experience to see one of the highest regarded noirs of the basically towards the end of the classic period on a film print. Next is another fantastic classic that doesn't get talked about enough with a rare print screening. It's a print screening of 1951's Westward the Women, directed by the great William Wellman, and a film that packs such a punch because for those who have never seen it, it's essentially about a wagon train that when problems befall our wagon train, it's not the lead hero played by Robert Taylor who takes charge. It's the women of the wagon train who basically take charge and basically solve everything themselves. So it's extraordinarily atypical for the period and so holds up extraordinarily well. And it's fantastic that the festival was able to get a print of this and show it, because this is another film that doesn't have a nice modern scan or something. So it's definitely one that certainly deserves a Blu-ray or UHD. We also have a print of 1933's International House, which is an interesting sort of musical comedy, also featuring the legendary W.C. Fields. For musical fans, the festival has a print of 1950's Summer Stock, which is famous for being the last and final Judy Garland musical at MGM in terms of her original contract. As part of the Midnight Movies section, the festival has a print of 1984's Heavenly Bodies. Then there's a print screening of the first of the most famous Miss Marple film adaptations, 1961's Murder, She Said, starring the iconic Margaret Rutherford. And while fans have sort of bemoaned for years that these are not exactly the character as Christie wrote her, they became the sort of most iconic in the public's eye and are absolute treasures and classics every time you return to them, and practically never get theatrical screenings. So seeing the first on a film print will be fantastic. And then the last for 35mm screenings is the 1933 pre-code film The Sin of Nora Moran, with Zita Johann in one of her few films outside of her immortal turn in 1932's The Mummy. This is a pre-code film and very much of the sort of loose genre of the fallen woman type story, and has plenty of pre-code elements. And this is another absolute deep cut in terms of the title being offered for screening, and especially on a film print. So that should be another one you should seek out, because the chances of seeing a print screening of this film again anytime soon are incredibly rare. Now to move on to the two titles being screened on 70mm large format prints. The first is really, I think, the most famous and the film that above all needs to be seen in its original 70mm form. That, of course, is the legend Lawrence of Arabia. And, of course, this will be one of the restoration prints that stem originally from the intensive, painstaking, famous 1989 restoration of Robert Harris. Now, Sony has completed newer digital restorations, so it's very rare these days, or at least a lot harder to see a 70mm print of Lawrence. It's hard to see a 70mm print, period. There are so few places still equipped for it and that can properly run it and actually do run 70mm. So this is definitely one of those once in a lifetime experiences. If you haven't seen Lawrence on the big screen, you really have to. And if you haven't seen a 70mm print, even if you've seen the latest 4K DCP and the digital advancements that Sony was able to do, it's still not the same. So this is definitely one of the once-in-a-lifetime experiences that as many filmgoers as possible need to experience. And then the other, as I alluded to before, is the new Warner restoration of the landmark masterpiece, The Searchers, which of course was famously shot in VistaVision, and here is being shown on a new 70mm print. And since the film ran through the camera horizontally and the frames were essentially 8 perforations in width, it is very easy to print a VistaVision film onto 70mm stock to try and retain retain some of that, as it was branded, motion picture high fidelity. That's what was done with Vertigo for the 1996 restoration, for example. So Warner has made a new 70mm print of the Searchers from this new digital restoration. So we've all been waiting with bated breath to see what the new master and restoration of the Searchers would do, how it would address the film's color, which has varied quite greatly on past video masters, and how it would handle the original audio track. And it's been, it's one of the Warner crown jewels, and we've all been sort of waiting to see what it would turn out like. But it's really interesting that Warner has made a new 70mm print of it. So these two 70mm screenings, anytime you've got a 70mm screening, those are major important draws. Drop everything, go, stand in the back of the theater, even if you can't get a seat, still try to see it, even if you have to just stand there. But it's really surprising and amazing that Warner has made a new 70mm print of the new restoration of the Searchers, and of course we should see that hitting UHD from Warner sometime in 2024. But as major as those are, we have a final category of, frankly, even more rare prints to be screened, and those are the two 35mm original Nitrate prints that are being screened as part of the festival. And of course, Nitrate is famous for the high silver content. There's nothing else in the world that quite looks like them, but actually being able to see a Nitrate print is a very rare thing, because you basically only have a handful of locations that are hazmat certified with a special Nitrate booth to prevent any problems from running a Nitrate print if, in the case, heaven forbid, there's an actual fire. So basically, you have the American Cinematheque in Los Angeles, you've got the George Eastman House in New York, you've got the BFI in London, and of course, UCLA also has a Nitrate vault. So there's only a handful of places, those I named, and one or two others, that can actually handle Nitrate, let alone, of course, run Nitrate as well. There are various small Nitrate festivals that are held every once in a while, but it's incredibly rare to see a Nitrate print, period. And it is something to be treasured regardless of what the film is, because it's such a rare opportunity, and there's nothing else in the world quite like them. So for this year, we have a Nitrate print screening of 1948's Night Has a Thousand Eyes, which of course is the horror film starring Eddie G. Robinson that's seen some really lovely Blu-ray releases, like the Indicator Blu-ray, which is loaded with extras, but actually seeing it on a Nitrate print for a beautifully shot black and white film from 1948 is definitely going to be something else. The other is a Nitrate print screening of the MGM 1950 classic musical Annie Get Your Gun, with its eye-popping MGM usage of color. That should be an absolute stunner on a Nitrate release print. So both of those are such incredible treasures that they're absolute must. Try to get in any way you can, because you're not going to get the opportunity to see a Nitrate print again anytime soon. They don't even do them at every festival, but anytime you can see particular film formats, whether it be outdated formats that no longer exist, or again 70mm large format, but especially above all seeing a Nitrate print, that's really something to focus on. So the biggest, most important experiences to be had at this year's festival are the 70mm presentations, and most of all, the two Nitrate presentations. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts, and in going over the schedule for the 2024 TCM Classic Film Festival, I've tried to highlight all the titles and particular screenings and formats that I think are notable or very important, plus a lot of the other programs that are really fantastic for getting a greater handle on film history and also the technology of film exhibition. There are some absolute treasures being screened in terms of print elements. We have 70mm prints, and most especially the two Nitrate prints are absolute musts. But there are so many rare titles and titles that don't have a good modern master or scan or physical media release in that listing and grouping of 35mm print screenings. So my advice is basically go to the Nitrate and 70mm shows, go to the side programs that I mentioned and highlighted, and then go to every print screening you possibly can. And the trouble of a festival is then trying to juggle what's scheduled against one another, or what's sold out of tickets and what you can actually get into. So it's easier said than done once you're actually there because it's compacted down to just a handful of days, and you do have to keep in mind that they are running the festival at different theater locations, so you will have to travel to the different theaters. But I like doing these because this is what I do with any film festival, whether I go or not. I look at it, if it's a repertory list of films or a classic film festival, I scour the list looking for what print elements are out there, what's possible that an art house might be able to get in my area, just knowing what's in circulation, but also looking at the restorations and documentaries for knowing what's going to be out there for the foreseeable future and start turning up, hopefully, on physical media releases. So the TCM Festival is usually a great indicator of what's going to turn up for the next year to year and a half or so. And of course, you've got several big name major crown jewel premieres for brand new restorations that will be seeing UHD somewhere in 2024. So as always, I hope my film geekery and babblings has been at least somewhat fun and informative. Hopefully, if you're able to go to the festival, this has been at least somewhat helpful in trying to narrow down all the various screenings that you might want to go to. And hopefully I was able to highlight some titles and screenings and events that maybe just hadn't crossed your radar yet, or hopefully I've been able to encourage you to check out some things that otherwise might have slipped past you. So as always, please keep supporting both studios and boutique labels, and of course the TCM network by buying films on disc, buying tickets to the festival, spreading your love of classic films and repertory screenings, because theaters and art houses especially need all the help and assistance they can get. And this also helps to not only help keep both physical media, but also film culture itself alive. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.